The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of forward operating base Kandahar like a blade through flesh. Major Rodriguez pressed his headset tighter against his ear, straining to decode the fragmented transmission bleeding through the interference. What he heard defied everything he knew about aviation physics and human survival. Base, this is Reaper 6, requesting immediate, terrain following, altitude 10 feet, repeat, 10 feet. Rodriguez nearly choked on his coffee. 10 feet. Someone was claiming they could fly a fixed-wing aircraft 10 feet above hostile terrain in complete darkness. The Major had logged over 3,000 hours in everything from Apache to F-16s, had seen pilots attempt impossible maneuvers that left wreckage scattered across mountainsides. No jet could fly that low, not in Afghanistan's unforgiving landscape, not and live to tell about it. Negative, Reaper 6, he barked into his microphone. You are not cleared for terrain following below 500 feet. Confirm your actual altitude and intentions. Silence, then barely audible through the static, sir, with respect, watch your 6. The earth began to shake, not the familiar rumble of distant artillery or the rhythmic thump of rotorcraft, but something else entirely. Something that made the coffee cups dance on Rodriguez's desk and sent a vibration through the concrete floor that climbed up his spine like electricity. Outside the command bunker, voices began shouting. Equipment clanged. Boots pounded against metal walkways. Rodriguez burst through the bunker door, his eyes scanning the star-drunk sky above the compound. The sound was growing louder now, a deep, mechanical roar that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. He grabbed his binoculars, sweeping left and right across the horizon, searching for navigation lights, engine glow, anything that might explain the impossible. Then he saw it. A shadow against shadows, moving faster than thought across the ridge line to the north. No lights, no visible exhaust signature, just a dark shape that seemed to flow like liquid mercury between the jagged peaks, following every contour of the terrain with surgical precision. As it banked around an outcropping of rock, Rodriguez caught a glimpse of its silhouette against the faint starlight, the distinctive twin-engine configuration and angular wings of an A-10 Thunderbolt II. But A-10s were slow, cumbersome, built for close air support, not for threading needles through mountain passes in complete darkness. What he was witnessing violated every principle of tactical aviation he'd learned in 23 years of service. The aircraft vanished behind the ridge, swallowed by the landscape as if it had never existed. The sound faded to whisper, then silence. Rodriguez lowered his binoculars, his hands trembling slightly. In the distance, a coyote howled, as if commenting on the impossibility it had just witnessed. Captain Vega emerged from the communications trailer, her face pale in the green glow of the night vision equipment. "Sir," she said quietly, "we just lost radar contact with that aircraft. No transponder signature, no heat bloom. It's like it just disappeared." Rodriguez stared at the empty sky, his mind racing through scenarios and explanations, finding none that satisfied the laws of physics or military protocol. Somewhere out there in the darkness, someone was flying an aircraft in ways that shouldn't be possible, performing maneuvers that existed only in the realm of simulation and theory. He keyed his radio with deliberate precision. "Control, this is Base Command. I need a full roster of all A-10 assets currently deployed in theater, and I need it 5 minutes ago." The morning briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as officers filed in, clutching coffee cups and incident reports. Major Rodriguez stood at the front of the room, a satellite image of the ridge line projected on the screen behind him. Red circles marked the suspected flight path of the mystery aircraft, a serpentine route that wound between peaks with margins of error measured in single digits. "Gentlemen," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the weight of sleepless hours, "what I'm about to show you challenges everything we understand about low-altitude flight operations in mountainous terrain." He clicked his remote, and the image zoomed in on a section of the ridge where the aircraft had been observed. At approximately 3:47 hours, an unidentified A-10 Thunderbolt conducted what can only be described as terrain-following flight at an altitude I initially thought was a radio malfunction. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, the base's senior aviation officer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sir, with respect, A-10s don't conduct terrain-following missions. They're not equipped for it. The aircraft lacks the necessary radar systems and—" "That's what I thought too," Rodriguez interrupted, advancing to the next slide. "But 3 separate radar installations tracked this aircraft following ground contours at altitudes between 8 and 12 feet above ground level. For reference, that's lower than most highway overpasses." A murmur rippled through the room. Captain Harrison from the 355th Fighter Squadron leaned forward. "Sir, that's physically impossible. The margin for error at that altitude, especially in mountainous terrain, is essentially zero. One updraft, one moment of spatial disorientation, and you're painting the mountainside with aluminum and aviation fuel." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Which brings us to our next problem." He clicked the remote again, revealing a communications log. "We have no record of any scheduled A-10 operations in that sector. No flight plans filed, no mission briefs, no acknowledgement from any squadron in theater that they had assets airborne during that time frame." The room fell silent. Ghost aircraft were the stuff of urban legends and classified projects that existed in the shadow world beyond their security clearances. But radar didn't lie, and neither did the testimony of a dozen personnel who had witnessed the impossible. Major Hendricks from Intelligence raised his hand. "Sir, have we considered the possibility that this was some kind of advanced unmanned system, something experimental that we're not cleared to know about?" "I've made inquiries through appropriate channels," Rodriguez replied carefully. "As of this morning, no agency or contractor has claimed ownership of this aircraft or acknowledged any experimental operations in our area of responsibility." Captain Vega stood from her position near the back of the room. "Sir, there's something else. I've been analyzing the radio transmission we received. The voice on that frequency, I've heard it before." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Explain." 3 months ago, during the evacuation of Firebase Charlie, we had an A-10 provide close air support for the operation. Same call sign Reaper 6. The pilot who flew that mission—" She paused, consulting her notes. "Captain Alexandra Raven Novik, 442nd Fighter Wing, transferred in from Bagram 6 months ago. She has a reputation for unconventional tactics." The name hung in the air like smoke. Several officers exchanged glances, recognition flickering across their faces. Everyone had heard whispers about the pilot they called Raven, stories that bordered on mythology, tales of impossible saves and aircraft pushed beyond their design limitations. Rodriguez felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align. "Captain Vega, I want you to pull everything we have on Captain Novik. Flight records, personnel files, mission reports, everything." He turned to address the room. "This briefing is now classified. What we've discussed doesn't leave this room until we have answers." As the officers filed out, Rodriguez remained standing before the satellite image, studying the impossible flight path traced in red. Somewhere out there, someone was rewriting the rules of physics, one mountain pass at a time. The personnel file for Captain Alexandra Novik read like a compilation of contradictions wrapped in Air Force Regulation Blue. Rodriguez spread the documents across his desk, each page revealing another layer of complexity in the enigma that had screamed across his ridge line at impossible altitude. Born in Montana to immigrant parents who had fled the Bosnian conflict, Novik had grown up on stories of survival and reinvention. Her father had been a helicopter pilot in the Yugoslav People's Army before the wars tore his country apart. Her mother, an aeronautical engineer who cleaned office buildings in Billings, until she could get her credentials recognized in America. The family photo clipped to her service record showed a gangly teenager standing between two people whose eyes held the weight of displacement and hope in equal measure. Novik's academic records painted the picture of a student who excelled in mathematics and physics but struggled with authority. Disciplinary reports from the Air Force Academy mentioned excessive questioning of established protocols and a tendency to pursue unconventional solutions to tactical problems. Her flight instructor's comments ranged from exceptional spatial awareness to recklessly creative, phrases that Rodriguez recognized as military euphemisms for someone who didn't color inside the lines. Her operational history, however, told a different story. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and a classified deployment that had been redacted so thoroughly that only the dates remained visible. Her mission success rate was unprecedented. Not a single friendly casualty during close air support operations under her command. But the methods that achieved those results had earned her a reputation that made squadron commanders simultaneously grateful and nervous. Captain Vega knocked on Rodriguez's office door, carrying a steaming cup of what might charitably be called coffee and a folder thick with incident reports. "Sir, I've compiled everything I could find on Reaper 6's recent activities. Some of it is interesting." Rodriguez gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Define interesting." Vega opened her folder, revealing a stack of documents flagged with yellow sticky notes. 3 weeks ago, Firebase Delta called for emergency close air support. Taliban forces had overrun their perimeter, and conventional air assets were grounded due to weather. Ceiling was down to 50 feet with heavy fog. Mission commanders declared the situation hopeless. She pulled out a mission report stamped with red ink. Novik launched anyway, flew the entire mission using visual flight rules in zero visibility, navigating by terrain features she'd memorized from satellite imagery. She put ordnance on target with such precision that she stopped the assault without a single friendly fire incident, despite operating within 50 meters of friendly positions. Rodriguez studied the report, noting the signature of the Firebase Delta commander, a man he knew to be conservative with his praise and stingy with his superlatives. The after-action review described Novik's performance as unprecedented and tactically brilliant. 2 weeks after that, Vega continued, she responded to a medical evacuation request in the Korangal Valley. The landing zone was taking mortar fire, and the medevac helicopter couldn't get in. Standard protocol would have been to suppress the enemy positions with area fire and hope for the best. She flipped to another page. Instead, Novik identified the exact location of the mortar team, a single position hidden in a cave system, and eliminated it with a single missile. The accuracy required for that shot. Vega shook her head. The margin of error was measured in inches, not meters. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. Each mission report painted the picture of a pilot who operated beyond the normal parameters of human capability, who saw tactical solutions that existed outside conventional doctrine. It was the kind of flying that earned legends and posthumous medals in roughly equal measure. "Where is she now?" Rodriguez asked. Vega hesitated. "That's the problem, sir. According to official records, Captain Novik is currently on administrative leave at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Has been for the past 2 weeks." Rodriguez felt the familiar chill of encountering information that didn't align with reality. But the voice on the radio last night matched her vocal pattern exactly, Vega confirmed. "I ran it through voice analysis software. 97% probability match." Rodriguez stared at the personnel file, at the photo of a young woman whose eyes held the same intensity he'd heard in that crackling radio transmission. Whatever was happening went beyond unauthorized flight operations or even rogue pilots. It touched something deeper, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand at attention. The encrypted communication from Ramstein Air Base arrived at 14:32 hours, bearing the digital signature of Colonel Patricia Hawkins, Director of Personnel Operations, European Theater. Rodriguez decoded the message with hands that trembled slightly, though whether from caffeine excess or growing apprehension, he couldn't determine. The text was brief, clinical, and utterly devastating. Captain Alexandra Novik remains under medical supervision following aircraft incident. Pilot currently unfit for flight duty pending psychological evaluation. Duration of grounding, indefinite. Colonel Hawkins sends. Rodriguez read the message 3 times before its implications fully registered. If Novik was grounded in Germany, then who had been flying that A-10 across the ridge line? The voice analysis had been conclusive. The flight patterns matched her documented tactical preferences, and the call sign was indisputably hers. Captain Vega appeared in his doorway as if summoned by his confusion. "Sir, you need to see this." She carried a tablet displaying what appeared to be a classified incident report, its contents partially redacted but still readable enough to paint a disturbing picture. 6 weeks ago, she began, settling into the chair across from his desk, Captain Novik was conducting a routine training mission over the Bavarian Alps. Solo flight, perfect weather conditions, aircraft performing within normal parameters. According to the flight data recorder, she was maintaining standard altitude and speed when something changed. Rodriguez leaned forward. Changed how? Vega scrolled through the digital document. The official report lists it as spatial disorientation resulting in controlled flight into terrain. But the data tells a different story. In the final 30 seconds of recorded flight, her aircraft descended from 8,000 feet to less than 100 feet above ground level, threading between mountain peaks at speeds that should have resulted in immediate structural failure. She paused, allowing the weight of that statement to settle. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing an A-10 flying through alpine valleys at altitudes they described as impossibly low, following terrain contours with precision that defied explanation. The aircraft disappeared into a cloud bank and was never seen again. Rodriguez felt ice crystallizing in his veins, but she survived. She was found 18 hours later, 12 miles from the projected crash site, suffering from severe dehydration and hypothermia, but otherwise uninjured. No memory of how she got there, no explanation for the missing aircraft, and no recollection of the final minutes of the flight. The room fell silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and the distant rumble of aircraft engines from the flight line. Rodriguez stared at the classified report, his mind struggling to process information that challenged not just military protocol but the fundamental nature of reality itself. "There's more," Vega continued softly. Medical examination revealed something unusual. Novik's inner ear showed signs of exposure to extreme G-forces levels that would have rendered most pilots unconscious or worse. But she displayed no symptoms of G-force trauma, no blackouts, no physiological distress indicators. Rodriguez rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a headache that had nothing to do with caffeine withdrawal. "What are the doctors saying?" "Officially, acute stress reaction with dissociative symptoms. She's been classified as unfit for flight duty pending extensive psychological evaluation." Vega's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Unofficially, the flight surgeons are baffled. Her test results don't match any known patterns of trauma or disorientation. It's as if she experienced something that doesn't exist in their medical textbooks." Outside Rodriguez's office window, the Afghan sun painted the mountain peaks in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere beyond those peaks, an aircraft that couldn't exist was being flown by a pilot who was supposedly thousands of miles away, performing maneuvers that violated the laws of physics and human endurance. Rodriguez looked at the photograph in Novik's personnel file, a young woman with intelligent eyes and a slight smile that suggested she knew secrets the world wasn't ready to hear. Whatever was happening transcended simple explanations or conventional military logic. It touched something primal, something that made his rational mind recoil, while his instincts whispered that the impossible was becoming inevitable. The answer came at 21:47 hours, crackling through radio static like a voice from another dimension. Rodriguez had been dozing in his office chair, surrounded by empty coffee cups and classified documents, when the transmission jolted him back to consciousness with its familiar, impossible clarity. Base Command, this is Reaper 6. Request permission to proceed with emergency close air support mission. Grid coordinates to follow. Rodriguez grabbed his headset, his pulse accelerating with recognition and disbelief. Reaper 6, this is Base Command. State your current position and mission authorization. Base Command, I am currently between locations. Mission authorization is immediate threat to friendly forces. Battalion-level engagement in progress. Coordinates 34.2581 north, 69.1234 east. Rodriguez's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. Those coordinates placed the action barely 15 kilometers from their current position, close enough that they should be hearing the sounds of battle, seeing the glow of tracer fire against the night sky. He spun to his computer, pulling up real-time satellite imagery of the specified location. The screen showed empty terrain. No heat signatures indicating combat, no electromagnetic interference suggesting active radio communications, no visible signs of the battalion-level engagement that Reaper 6 was describing. But Rodriguez had learned to trust his instincts over technology, and his instincts were screaming that something fundamental about reality had shifted. Reaper 6, we have no reports of friendly forces in that sector. Can you confirm visual contact with engaged units? Static filled the frequency for several seconds before the response came through, tinged with something that might have been sadness or resignation. Base Command, the engagement occurred 3 days ago. 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry Regiment. 18 casualties, 4 KIA. I was unable to respond in time. Rodriguez felt the floor drop away beneath his feet. 3 days ago, 3rd Battalion had indeed been engaged in a fierce firefight at those exact coordinates. The battle had lasted 6 hours, with air support delayed due to mechanical failures and weather conditions. By the time close air support arrived, the damage had been done exactly as Reaper 6 had described. Reaper 6, Rodriguez said carefully, his voice barely steady, that engagement is concluded. Repeat, that engagement is concluded. Negative Base Command. I can see muzzle flashes, hear the radio calls for support. They're requesting immediate air support, danger close, coordinates 34.2581 north, 69.1234 east. I will not fail them again. The transmission cut to static, leaving Rodriguez staring at his radio equipment as if it had transformed into something alien and incomprehensible. He grabbed his secure phone, dialing the direct line to 3rd Battalion's Operations Center with hands that refused to stop shaking. Major Thompson answered on the second ring. 3rd Battalion Operations, Thompson speaking. Tom, this is Rodriguez at Base Command. I need to ask you something and I need a straight answer. 3 days ago, during your engagement in Sector 77 Alpha, did you request close air support? A pause. Yeah, we did, multiple times, took hours before anyone showed up. Why? Rodriguez closed his eyes. During that engagement, did anyone mention the call sign Reaper 6? Another pause, longer this time. Christ, Rodriguez, how did you? Yeah, we had a pilot on frequency using that call sign. Kept promising air support was inbound, told us to mark our positions, said she could see our situation from overhead. But no aircraft ever appeared. Some of my guys swore they could hear jet engines in the distance, but we never got visual contact. The phone felt heavy in Rodriguez's hand. Tom, this is important. What time did those radio transmissions occur? Around 2200 hours, maybe 2215. Why? Rodriguez, what the hell is going on? Rodriguez looked at his watch. 2214 hours. In the distance, barely audible above the ambient noise of the forward operating base, he could hear the distinctive whine of turbofan engines approaching from the north. The sky erupted in thunder and flame at exactly 2215 hours, just as Major Thompson's voice crackled through the secure phone line, with reports of incoming air support 3 days in the past. Rodriguez stood outside the command bunker, his eyes fixed on coordinates that should have shown empty terrain, watching tracer rounds arc through the darkness like deadly fireworks. But there were no enemy positions at those coordinates, no friendly forces under fire. The battle Major Thompson was describing had ended 72 hours ago with a final casualty count that would haunt Rodriguez's dreams for years to come. Yet through his binoculars, he could see the unmistakable pattern of close air support operations unfolding with lethal precision. Base Command, this is Reaper 6, beginning gun runs on enemy positions. Grid 34.2581 by 69.1234. Friendlies are marked with infrared strobes. I have positive visual on your location. Rodriguez keyed his radio with desperate urgency. Reaper 6, abort your attack run. Repeat, abort your attack run. There are no hostile forces at that location. Negative Base Command. I have clear visual on muzzle flashes and enemy movement. 3rd Battalion is pinned down and taking casualties. Beginning attack now. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon opened fire with its characteristic buzzsaw roar, sending streams of depleted uranium rounds into empty mountainside with devastating accuracy. Each burst illuminated the terrain in strobing light, revealing nothing but rock and scrub vegetation, where Reaper 6 was seeing enemy combatants and battlefield chaos. Rodriguez watched in fascination and horror as an invisible battle played out across coordinates that existed somewhere between memory and reality. The A-10 banked and dove with mechanical precision, its pilot calling out target acquisitions and battle damage assessments for enemies that existed only in the echo of past events. Direct hit on heavy weapons position, came the voice through the radio. Enemy mortar team neutralized. Friendlies are advancing to secondary positions. Through his binoculars, Rodriguez could see the actual results of the gun runs: pulverized rock, smoldering craters, and the twisted remnants of metal objects that shouldn't have existed at those coordinates. As each burst ended, the evidence disappeared like smoke, leaving only pristine mountainside that showed no signs of recent combat. Captain Vega approached from the communications trailer, her face pale with the kind of fear that comes from witnessing the impossible. "Sir, I'm monitoring 3rd Battalion's frequency from 3 days ago. The archived communications are playing in real time, synchronized with Reaper 6's current attack runs." Rodriguez felt reality sliding sideways like a vehicle losing traction on ice. "What are you saying?" "The battle from 3 days ago, it's happening again. Same coordinates, same timeline, same radio chatter. But this time, Reaper 6 is responding to the calls for air support that she missed the first time." They completed another attack run, pulling up into a climb that took it directly over the forward operating base. For a brief moment, Rodriguez caught sight of the aircraft silhouetted against the star-filled sky, undeniably real, undeniably present, undeniably impossible. Base Command, this is Reaper 6. Enemy positions have been neutralized. 3rd Battalion is reporting all clear. Mission complete. The radio fell silent. The sound of jet engines faded into the distance. The mountainside returned to its natural state of darkness and stillness. Rodriguez lowered his binoculars, his hands trembling with the weight of witnessing something that challenged every assumption he'd held about the nature of time, reality, and redemption. In his pocket, the secure phone buzzed with an incoming message from Major Thompson, timestamped 3 days in the past. "Rodriguez, You're not going to believe this, but we just received the most effective close air support I've ever seen. Call sign Reaper 6. Pilot knew our situation better than we did. Saved a lot of lives tonight. The investigation began at dawn, though Rodriguez questioned whether traditional methods of inquiry could adequately address phenomena that existed outside conventional understanding. He assembled a team of specialists, radar technicians, communications experts, aircraft maintenance personnel, and flight surgeons, each tasked with examining a different aspect of the Reaper 6 incidents. Technical Sergeant Morrison, the base's senior radar operator, delivered his report with the methodical precision of someone who had spent 15 years tracking aircraft across some of the world's most challenging airspace. Sir, our primary and secondary radar systems detected a definite aircraft signature during both incidents. Transponder code matched known A-10 configurations, flight profile consistent with close air support operations. He paused, consulting his notes with the reluctance of someone reporting information that challenged his professional expertise. However, the radar returns showed inconsistencies that don't match any known aircraft characteristics. The signature would appear, conduct operations, then simply vanish from all tracking systems simultaneously. No gradual fade indicating distance, no electromagnetic interference suggesting electronic countermeasures. Just gone. Captain Liu from Aircraft Maintenance presented her findings with similar bewilderment. We've conducted comprehensive inspections of all A-10 assets assigned to this theater. Every aircraft is accounted for, all maintenance logs are current, and none show signs of recent combat operations or the kind of extreme maneuvering described in witness reports. She held up a tablet displaying detailed maintenance records. Furthermore, the flight envelope described in these incidents exceeds the A-10's documented performance specifications. The aircraft isn't designed for the kind of terrain-following flight that multiple witnesses observed. The structural stress alone should have resulted in catastrophic airframe failure. Dr. Sarah Kim, the base's senior flight surgeon, contributed findings that pushed the investigation into even stranger territory. I've reviewed Captain Novik's medical records from Ramstein, including recent brain imaging studies. The scans show unusual activity patterns in regions associated with spatial processing and time perception. She displayed a series of colorized brain scans on her laptop screen. These neural patterns don't match any known psychological conditions, but they're consistent with accounts of temporal displacement syndrome, a theoretical condition described in classified research on experimental pilot training programs. Rodriguez studied the brain scans, noting areas of unusual activity that seemed to pulse with an almost rhythmic pattern. Doctor, are you suggesting that Captain Novik's condition might be related to some kind of experimental program? Dr. Kim's expression grew cautious. I'm saying that her neurological patterns match theoretical models for pilots who have been exposed to extreme temporal acceleration stress. The kind of thing you might see if someone had been subjected to time dilation effects at high velocity or gravitational extremes. The room fell silent as the implications of that statement settled over the assembled team. Rodriguez had read enough classified briefings to know that the military's experimental programs often push the boundaries of known science, sometimes with consequences that weren't fully understood until years later. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from Communications added his voice to the growing chorus of impossible findings. Sir, I've analyzed the voice patterns from the Reaper 6 transmissions. The audio signature is definitely Captain Novik, but there are anomalies in the frequency modulation that suggest the signal originated from somewhere else. Somewhere else meaning what exactly? Rodriguez asked. The signal characteristics indicate transmission through a medium that doesn't match standard atmospheric propagation. It's as if the radio waves were passing through some kind of temporal or dimensional barrier before reaching our receivers. Rodriguez looked around the room at faces that reflected his own mixture of professional skepticism and growing acceptance of the impossible. Each specialist had approached the investigation from their own area of expertise, yet all had arrived at conclusions that defied conventional explanation. Outside the briefing room windows, the afternoon sun painted the Afghan landscape in harsh browns and yellows. Somewhere in that familiar terrain, the boundaries between past and present, between memory and reality, had become permeable. And at the center of it all was a pilot who existed simultaneously in two different places, fighting battles that had already been lost and won. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Lieutenant Sarah Chen from the base's meteorological unit, who had been analyzing atmospheric conditions during both Reaper 6 incidents. Her report, delivered with the nervous excitement of someone who had discovered something significant, would reshape Rodriguez's understanding of what they were confronting. "Major," she began, spreading weather charts across the briefing table, "I've been examining barometric pressure, electromagnetic field variations, and ionospheric disturbances during the times of reported aircraft sightings. What I found doesn't match any standard meteorological phenomena." Rodriguez studied the charts, noting unusual spike patterns in various measurements. "Explain what I'm looking at, Lieutenant." Chen pointed to a series of red marks scattered across the timeline. "During both incidents, we recorded significant fluctuations in local magnetic fields, the kind of disturbances typically associated with solar flares or electromagnetic pulse events. But there was no solar activity during those periods, and no known sources of electromagnetic interference." She flipped to another chart showing atmospheric pressure readings. "More importantly, the barometric variations follow a specific pattern that matches theoretical models for localized spacetime distortions, the kind of thing you might see if gravity itself was being manipulated on a small scale." Rodriguez felt familiar chill of encountering information that challenged the fundamental nature of reality. "Are you suggesting some kind of gravitational anomaly?" "I'm suggesting that the atmospheric conditions during the Reaper 6 sightings match computer models for temporal field generation," Chen replied carefully. "According to classified research I've been cleared to review, these patterns are consistent with experimental work on chronoton field manipulation." The term hung in the air like unexploded ordnance. Rodriguez had encountered references to chronoton research in intelligence briefings that existed at the intersection of theoretical physics and military applications. Projects so classified that their existence was neither confirmed nor denied by any official agency. Captain Vega looked up from her notes. "Lieutenant, are you saying that Captain Novik might be caught in some kind of temporal loop?" Chen nodded slowly. "The evidence suggests she may be experiencing temporal displacement, existing in multiple time streams simultaneously. The incident in Germany might have exposed her to some kind of chronoton field that altered her relationship with linear time." Rodriguez remembered Dr. Kim's brain scans, the unusual neural activity patterns that had defied conventional medical explanation. "Doctor, could exposure to temporal fields explain Captain Novik's neurological anomalies?" Dr. Kim consulted her tablet. "Theoretically, yes. If someone were exposed to intense chronoton radiation, it might create permanent changes in brain chemistry and neural pathway formation. The affected individual might retain consciousness across multiple temporal states, experiencing past, present, and future as simultaneous events." The implications were staggering. Rodriguez pictured Novik trapped between moments, experiencing the 3rd Battalion firefight as an ongoing present reality while simultaneously existing in a German medical facility thousands of miles away. The radio transmissions, the impossible flight patterns, the precision attacks on targets that existed only in memory, all of it suddenly made terrible sense. "Sir," Sergeant Morrison interjected, "if this is accurate, It means Reaper 6 isn't just reliving past events. She's actually changing them. The air support that 3rd Battalion reported receiving 3 days ago, that was her, operating from some kind of temporal displacement zone. Rodriguez stared at the assembled evidence, feeling the weight of discoveries that would reshape military aviation and human understanding of time itself. Somewhere between dimensions, between moments, Captain Alexandra Novik was fighting a war that existed across multiple realities, correcting failures and preventing casualties in battles that had already been decided by history. The question now was whether they could find her before the temporal displacement tore her apart completely. The rescue mission began with equipment that didn't officially exist, acquired through channels that Rodriguez preferred not to examine too closely. Within 18 hours of Lieutenant Chen's briefing, a team of specialists arrived at the forward operating base aboard an unmarked transport aircraft, carrying instruments that hummed with purposes beyond conventional military applications. Dr. Marcus Webb, the team's leader, possessed the kind of security clearance that made conversations stop when he entered a room. His briefing to Rodriguez contained words like temporal resonance and chronoton tracking, delivered with the casual authority of someone discussing routine maintenance procedures. "Major, we've been monitoring unusual temporal signatures throughout this theater for the past several weeks," Webb explained, setting up equipment that looked like the offspring of radar systems and particle accelerators. Captain Novik's displacement event in Germany created ripples across multiple time streams. She's become what we call a temporal anchor, existing simultaneously across several chronological positions. Rodriguez watched technicians calibrate instruments that displayed readouts he couldn't interpret. "Doctor, can we extract her from this condition?" Webb's expression grew somber. The temporal displacement is accelerating. Each time she intervenes in past events, the stress on her chronological matrix increases exponentially. If we don't stabilize her timeline within the next 72 hours, the displacement will become permanent. The words carried implications that Rodriguez didn't want to explore. Permanent meaning what? Meaning she'll be trapped between moments forever, conscious but unable to exist fully in any single timeline. A ghost haunting multiple realities simultaneously. The tracking equipment activated at 3:22 hours, its displays erupting with data that painted a picture of reality torn along temporal seams. Dr. Webb monitored the readings with growing urgency, calling out coordinates and temporal variance measurements to his team of specialists. "We have contact," he announced. "Captain Novik is currently manifesting approximately 47 kilometers northeast of our position, engaged in what appears to be a rescue operation that occurred 6 months ago." Rodriguez grabbed his headset, tuning to the Reaper 6 frequency. Static filled the channel before resolving into the familiar voice that had become both haunting and hopeful. "Base Command, this is Reaper 6. I have visual on a downed helicopter crew, 2 survivors visible, hostile forces closing on their position, requesting permission to engage." Rodriguez consulted the mission records that Dr. Webb had provided. 6 months earlier, a Black Hawk helicopter had been shot down in that exact sector. The rescue operation had been delayed due to weather conditions, and both crew members had died from their injuries before ground forces could reach them. "Reaper 6, this is Base Command. You are cleared to engage hostile forces. Protect those crew members at all costs." "Copy that, Base Command. Beginning attack run now." Through the temporal tracking equipment, Rodriguez could watch the battle unfold across 2 different timelines simultaneously. On one display, the historical record showed the helicopter crew's fate, a tragedy that had haunted the rescue commanders for months. On another screen, real-time chronoton readings tracked Reaper 6's intervention, her A-10 diving through hostile territory with the determination of someone who refused to let history repeat its failures. "Direct hits on enemy positions," came her voice through the radio. Ground forces are clear to proceed with extraction. The crew is alive, repeat, both crew members are alive. Dr. Webb monitored his instruments with growing alarm. Major, the temporal stress is approaching critical levels. Each intervention is causing more damage to her chronological matrix. We need to initiate extraction procedures immediately. Rodriguez stared at the displays showing two different versions of reality, one where tragedy had been prevented, another where the temporal displacement was slowly destroying the woman who had made that prevention possible. Captain Alexandra Novik was burning herself out across multiple timelines, trading her own existence for the lives of people who had already been lost.